Okay, I will call the meeting to order. I'll begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel. With me is Gisela Rempel to my left and Mark Borowski to my far left. The assessor today is Matthew Harling, and the recording secretary is Kara Belshaw. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application and will limit discussion to those matters. The statement that the applicants or assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. We advise that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. He makes his decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order to be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about a hearing has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the board will deliberate in private to make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are recorded and will be part of the public record. Can you swear them in, Kara, please?
I'll swear.
Swear. Please state your name.
Matthew Russell Harlan.
Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name.
Rod Slaughter?
Do you swear the evidence you'll present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. The first item on the agenda today is 600 Wall Street. So you can begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-2211. The roll number is 13011224000. The address is 600 Wall Street. The owners are 70798 Manitoba Limited and 71045 Manitoba Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $5,460,000. Now, before I continue with my brief, I actually do have a recommendation on this property.
Okay.
Let's follow with look at page 4 of my brief. Just kind of follow along what I initially my initial work up to my recommendation. The only thing I had really changed here was I changed the rent. We were originally applying a model rent of $5.45 a square foot. However, I've adjusted that to $4.50 a square foot because I feel the rent may be a little model rent a little high. And the comparables I had used in my brief I felt didn't support the model as much. So that's why I have adjusted the model rent, or the rate to model rent, the rent to $4.50. I haven't changed any other parameters in the brief. So the initial value of $5,460,000 is revised to $4,464,000.
And how do you feel about that number?
We accept that.
Short and sweet. We will move up the street to 725 Wall Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-3313. The roll number is 13011795200. The address is 725 Wall Street, and the owner is 2523388 Manitoba Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $652,000. For this property, I also have another recommendation for this one as well. And if you'd just like to follow page 4 of my brief, I'll just give a quick overview of my recommendation. For this particular property, I just adjusted the rent. In this case, we were using an overall model rent, blended rent of $8.70, based on a total area of 6,443 square feet. After reviewing Mr. Slaughter's brief and looking at the actual rents in place, I've adjusted my rent to $8.41 a square foot. I made no other changes. I left else the vacancy capitalization rate, and I'm recommending the value of $608,000 from $652,000.
Accept.
We go to 588 Wall Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-2206. The roll number is 130-111-83100. The address is 588 Wall Street. The owners are 70790 Manitoba Limited and 71045 Manitoba Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on a reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $1,297,000. This property I was able to discuss as well, so I do have a recommendation on this one as well. Again, for this recommendation, again, it's just an adjustment to the model rent we're using. I've adjusted the rent from your previously using a blended rent of $8.30 for a total with a total leasehold area of $12,578. I've adjusted that overall rent to $7.0650, which gives us a blended rent of $696. I have not made any other changes to any parameters, and I'm recommending a value from $1,297,000 to $1,081,000.
How do you feel?
Oh, sorry?
The blended?
Oh, the blended, the initial blended, or?
No, subsequent.
Oh, 696.
How do you feel about that?
We accept.
Okay, 634 Erin Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The file number is 19-2199. The roll number is 130-111-40000. The address is 650 Erin Street, and the owner is 70798 Manitoba Limited and 71045 Manitoba Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $256,000. I don't have an actual hard copy of the recommendation, but I was discussing with Mr. Paul Slaughter, and I'm making a rec of, we initially had assessed at $256,000, and I have a verbal rec of $213,000.
213?
$213,000. I believe that's correct.
You're on the same one?
That's 634 Erin?
Oh, 634?
This is
Yeah.
650.
650.
Oh.
That's why I was saying.
Okay, no, it's the first
Am I on the
one.
property, or?
It's
We're on the
634.
wrong property.
Oh,
We have 634 being next
Oh.
on the agenda.
Well, we can.
okay. I apologize, that's,
Well, we can go, let's do 650.
okay.
You started at 650.
Sorry about that, I guess I had my papers in this order.
Yeah. I was looking for it. You started on 650, let's start on 650. Let's keep on 650 then.
Apologize.
Now you're saying 256 and you have a verbal rec,
Up to 13.
213,000. And based on,
I believe this was where this is also a rent. We didn't, we were just discussing this previously, so let me go check my.
Yeah, I think I can speak to it.
Sure, yeah, if you
Yeah.
can.
It was basically, Mr. Chairman, just a revision of the market rent, a slight increase to the capitalization rate to 7.5. All other rates were left the same as what the city has. Just again, to mention that when we're agreeing to values, we're not necessarily agreeing to any rates or parameters being
just an
applied
agreement on that.
on value.
Yeah. Okay, and I think you're accepting the values. Okay, we'll go back to 634 Johnson Street.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just a trick to see if I was paying attention.
You got it.
I got caught.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-3576. The roll number is 13011145000. The address is 634 Aaron Street, and the owner is Premier Management and Investments Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $604,000 for this property. I do have a recommendation for this one as well. This particular recommendation I made, we were, again, previously assessing the property at $604,000. My primary reason to make a recommendation on this property was there was a sale back in, if you look on page 2, remember, there was a sale back in January 19th of 2017 at $535,000. And I verified the sale looked like a fair, bona fide arm's length sale. When I could prove everything I read and the sales unit we received. And I felt we were a little high at 604, so that's why I recommended 645, just a slight minor increase from last cycle. So
You mean 545?
545. Sorry, 545. So
Okay, and how do you feel about that?
We accept it.
Thank you. 664.
Maybe we could speed this one up,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. We'd just like to request a confirmation of the assessment, please.
Okay, can you read the information?
sure, I'll just read the file number and then roll over it. The file number is 19-2203. The roll number is 13096153600. The address is 664 Aaron Street. And the 2020 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2018 was $266,000.
Okay, can you just quickly lead us through your valuation?
Just to the page 4, my brief. There's a total leasable area of 3,300 square feet. We're applying a model rent of $6.46 a square foot, which is a potential rent of $21,318. We are using 6% for vacancy, 2% for expenses, $3.75 a square foot for shortfall, which gives us a net operating income of $18,895, and we are applying a capitalization rate of 7.1, which gives us a estimated value of $266,000.
Okay, I think it then you're going to decline to present any.
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you okay there, Martin? Okay. Back to Wall Street, 88 Wall Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-2166. The roll number is 13011909000. The address is 885 Wall Street, and the owner is 885 Wall Street Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on a reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $1,222,000.
1,022,000.
1,022,000. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Monday morning's getting to me.
See, now I'm paying the 10.
I do actually have a recommendation for this property as well, so I will. Quickly. Again, if you turn to page 4 of my brief, you'll see the initial workup I have presented. For this particular property, I just had made an adjustment to the rent. We were using, again, previously a model rent of $7.61 a square foot. I adjusted that to $7 cents a square foot, as I felt it was a better indication of the market for this property based on some of the comparables I found. As my initial comparables, I felt were a little, the initial value we had on the model rent we had was slightly high, so I've adjusted that based on some comparables. My comparables in my brief that I felt better support the $7 rent. So I have no made other changes other than that. So we're using 6% vacancy, 2% for the non-comparables, 375 for shortfall, and 7.7 for a cap rate. So nothing's changed there, but I'm recommending a value of $938,000.
And how do you feel about that, Ryan?
We can't accept that.
Okay. So, is there anything you wish to add to your brief then?
Would you like me to just continue with the rest of the brief, go through, I guess, or
Sure.
I'll just kind of go through. I'll just start from these. I'll start from the property description. Just go over the description of the property. Parcel use is an industrial warehouse. There's one building on the premise. The effective year built is 1961. The wall heights are 15 feet. The zoning is M1 manufacturing light. The land area is 17,167 square feet, with a leasable area of 11,600 square feet and a land plan area of 1.48. If you look at page 2 of my brief, you'll just see the request for information have been supplied from the owner. So if you look below, you'll see there are no recent sales on the subject property and there are no subject leases in place at any time. Page 3 of my brief, it's just my rent comparables. Again, initially we had used $7.61 as our model rent. I've adjusted to $7. And I feel that my comparables support the $7 rent. You'll see my comparables range from ages of 1954 to 1973, whereas the effective year built of the subject is 1961. The areas range from 2,170 square feet to 15,158 square feet. The wall heights range from 12 feet to 18 feet, and the rents range from $6.88 a square foot to $7.92. So I feel our $7 rent I would recommend supported by my comparables. Page 4 of my brief, again, it's just the income value workup. Again, I'm basing my recommendation going forth. So again, the rent would be adjusted in this case at 11,600 square feet at the $7 rent. We're using 6% for the vacancy, 2% for non-recoverables, $3.75 a square for shortfall, and 7.7% for the cap rate, which gave us the $930,000, which I had recommended. Page 5 of my brief, it's just another breakdown of the income value summary. Again, this is based on the original value I had from my brief. Page 6 of my brief is just information about the capitalization rates, our capitalization rates. Our cap rates, again, are based on variables such as age, size, location, so these are some of the factors that influence the cap rate we would apply. If you look under the industrial, under the City of Winnipeg 20th to 80th percentile, you'll see the cap rate of 7.7 we applied falls within the parameters, or 60% of the properties fall within these cap rate ranges, so I feel the 7.7% cap rate is a fair cap rate for this property. And if you look at the other published rates, such as Collier's, CRB, Cushman Wakefield, you'll see there are 7.7 falls within their range too. So just to say, this is just to show that our cap rate, the cap rate we've shown supports and supported. Page 7 of my brief is just some information about the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. Page 8 of my brief is just some photos of the subject property. Starting at the top, you'll see the front of the building on on Wall Street. The second photo is just a kind of a side view of the property, and below on page 8 you see a rear view of the property just to show where the back is. The back of the property as well as the loading bay door. Page 9 of my brief just shows some photos of the subject property overhead views to kind of show the property in relation to the parcel itself. This continues on page 10, just again some different angles to show the rear of the property, just kind of overhead aerial view of the property where it's in relation to Wall Street. And page 11 is just parcel boundaries and subject property of the Google Maps, just to show where the property is in relation to on Wall Street. Page 12 through 15 is just the income expense mailer that we were provided by the owner, so I'm just showing that they were compliant with our request for the income expense mailer. Page 16, my brief, again, is just some information about, you know, the first look the department's taken, again, it's the non-recoverables. I won't really go into that because I'm sure the board's aware of our position on that. Page 16 below is just some information about cap rate evidence, just to 16, 17, there's a sample of some capitalization rates, just to further support our model. So again, these are not used as comparables, just some comparables actual sales that happen in the market, just to further support our capitalization rates. Page 18, my brief, just some information again about the non-recoverable expense samplings. Again, I'm not going to go into that. Just again, how we're allowed to present this cycle as we feel from what we're finding in the market for non-recoverables. And page 19, my brief, is just some information about the IO double standards and how the department follows them. That is my presentation, and I ask the board to confirm my value at $930,000. Thank you.
Questions?
Just a couple, thank you. Mr. Harling, the property, from what you understand, hasn't gone through any physical changes since the last taxation year for the last assessment cycle, is that correct?
That is, I'm aware, correct, there's nothing that I have more.
But the assessment has increased 44% since the last cycle, is that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes. So.
On page 13 of your presentation, page 12, you include the owner's income and expense questionnaire submission.
I do, it's correct.
And they do show that there is a rent in place. On page 12, it shows $55,100. The math on that would be $4.75 a square foot. But the city has not given any weight to that, but rather applied market rent. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Any reason for that?
No, well, the reason would be I just felt the market rent comparables I've supplied, I feel are are better supported, and then that's why I haven't put any weight on that particularly. So.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's all the questions.
Mark, any questions?
Yeah. So this is owner occupied?
I believe. I believe it is, yes. Yes. Yeah, it wasn't checked off on the actual box, but I believe it is something contract.
It is.
It is, yes.
So then the rent shown on the income and expense mailer is a book rent?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. That's yes. I should have stated that too. That's another reason why I'm relying more on my comparables. So.
And what goes on in the building?
I believe the business. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to inspect the property, so I can't remember the exact anything in the building. Unless you want to.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. Yeah.
Subsequently. And I see that there's, is it 2 loading docks?
I believe there's just the one.
Entrances with.
I believe the back is just the one.
It looks like 2, but one appears to have something.
Yeah,
across
it looks like a fence blocking it. So I believe it's. I can't speak to this. I don't know if that's part of this exact building. I can't tell from this. I believe it is, but I don't know if that's used or not. But I know there's just the one. I can tell you. You can clearly see in the photo it's used as a loading bay. So.
Well, I guess we'll find out more about it shortly. That's all my questions.
Okay, any questions? No. Thank you. Okay, and Mr. Britsky stole my question again. We're occupied.
All about being last, eh? Darn, all the good stuff
Yeah.
goes.
Okay, you can proceed.
If I just, one last question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bresky asked a question that I was kind of alluding to, so just to confirm that the actual rental place wasn't given weight because predominantly it was a book rent, it was an
Okay.
internal rent.
Okay.
That's correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I do have some rebuttal, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Would you like me to start with the rebuttal, Mr. Chairman? or-
Sure.
Yeah? This is just regarding some of the city's rent comparisons. And the question asked by the panel regarding the nature of the rent is kind of a key part of, at least part of our rebuttal. In our experience, many times when you find these older manufacturing or light industrial sort of warehouses that are single occupant, and an investigation shows that they haven't been on the market for any amount of time. You can't find any evidence of being on the market. It's usually a flag raised by our office that there's a possibility anyway that it could be an internal rent that was being communicated to the city. And from my understanding, the city isn't able to vet every possible rent. And therefore, sometimes these rents come out into comparisons, such as the subject properties being an internal rent. And there's some examples of that as well in the city's evidence. The very first comparison that the city had was 877 Wall. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to verify this, so it remains unverified. But in our evidence, we show a picture of the property. It's a single occupant, 15,000 square foot, 1973, so it's quite a bit newer. And it has a similar land-to-building ratio. But I found no evidence of this ever being on the market, which leads me to believe that something may be up. The second flag raised to me is that the rent simply, frankly, seems higher than anything that we've found in the market for arm's length leases. The second comparison that the city has is 1556 Erin, and we have in fact verified that this is an a non-arm's length rent. So on page 3, you'll see a photograph of the property at the top. At the bottom, you'll see the aerial map, and there's a red dot marking the subject or the comparison. And you'll see just to the north of it, where the roll number is listed, is a second property on Clifton. They're both owned by Weir Holdings Corp. If you turn to the next pages, you'll see the tax bills indicating the owner, registered owner, Weir Holdings. And if you continue along after those 2 pages, you'll see the Corporations Act annual return information for Weir Holdings. And the principal of Weir Holdings, you'll see halfway down the page, is Bruce Weir. If you then turn to the next page, you'll see that the tenant in place for the business tax bill is Groundstar Systems Limited. And if we continue on to the next page, we'll see that Groundstar Systems, the principal is in fact Bruce Weir. So this is the when we have a flag raised, we often suspect that there may be a non-arm's length nature, and this is proof to us that this is a related parties. And therefore, we wouldn't put as much weight on this second comparison either. The third comparison is also on Erin, 1574. We have a photograph here in our evidence. It would be a fairly good comparison in size, original age, wall height, and land-to-building ratio. The two differences are that unlike the subject property, which is predominantly an unfinished light manufacturing, this property has been renovated to have nearly 40% office. You can see from the photograph that a lot of care has been put into this property. Renovated exterior, renovated interior. This is an arm's length lease. We know that because we actually represent this property. We represent the owners. They pay $6.88 a square foot. This is the first of the city's comparisons I would actually put weight on. And I would be expecting that the subject property's condition would warrant a lower rent per square foot. So right off the top, we think that we have concern with even the revised rent of $7 a square foot. 2 pages on page 5 is 1561 Erin. I could find no information on this. I couldn't even find a business assessment on this property. We used to work for the previous owners of this property. It was Koch Stainless Steel. And I know that it has a high degree of office in this property. And it also has a land-to-building ratio of nearly 4 to 1. Keeping in mind, you have heard that the subject property is sitting at around 1.3. It's a very constrained lot. And this is a factor that would influence the rent, even if this is arm's length. I would suggest that this is going to put this as a superior property, the fact that it has a fenced compound paved with a 4 to 1 land-to-building ratio. You can see the aerial photo at the bottom. And the last comparison is actually more of a retail property. It's on St. James Street, located between Saskatchewan and Dublin. It's occupied by machinery, tools, and books. It's almost completely air-conditioned, finished space. Again, I think that even though this is an arm's length lease, this is going to be a far superior property that would command a significantly higher rent than the subject property that we discussed. And that's all the rebuttal. Thank you.
Okay, any questions on the rebuttal?
No, I think I'm okay, thank you.
Any, Mark, any questions on the rebuttal? Any questions? You,
Oh, sorry. Based upon your evidence, I'm wondering what you think the rent should be.
I'll have that in my direct evidence, actually. The answer is, I believe, $6.50 a square, $6 a square foot.
okay, well then you may as well proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. So we have our direct evidence then. And Mr. Harling has described the property. I won't go into too much detail, but there are a few important facts, I think, that have to be considered when we take a look at the valuation and the market rent. Again, one is that the land-to-building ratio is 1.35 to 1. You can see from the aerial photos, it's a rather constrained, small lot, barely enough for minimal parking and access to, off a back alley, to a dock loading door, and there's a grade loading door as well. The property is aged, built in the 1950s, lower ceiling height, minimal office finish. It's mostly just a manufacturing. The occupant is Wingwood Millworks. They are a millwork light manufacturer. Page 3, you can see the location on Wall Street. Sorry, I said 1.35. It's 1.45 to 1 is the land-to-building ratio. The property was purchased in 2009 by the owners for $425,000. And it is our opinion that the current assessment of over double that, $1,022,000, is excessive. It also represents a 44% increase over the value that was agreed to last cycle. 2 years previous reference date. So I'll move ahead to page 7 where we begin the income approach. We feel that's the primary approach to use for such a property. I made mention in the questioning that there is a rent in place for the property at $4.75 a square foot. We give no weight to this rent because it is in fact an internal rent. We've looked to 15 rent comparisons that are shown on page 7. Sorry, I had a page here. I'm just going to open again. Pause for a moment with the addresses. The first comparison is on Erin, 1578 Erin. It was built in 1969. It's much smaller, 2,700 square feet, and it has a lease in the reference date of $5.01 a square foot. Now, right off the top, this is more in line with what we see in this area, 1950s, 60s, vintage predominantly, very small land-to-building ratios in the Wall, Erin, West End industrial location, shorter ceiling heights, usually higher degree of finish because typically these properties will be finished as maybe even semi-office. So we typically find that the rents are closer to $5 or $6 a square foot. This is one example. Further up in the West End is Weston. This is actually a multi-tenant property built in the 1970s, so it's a different sort of property. But it shows rents in that property, a multi-tenanted property, that range from $6.25 to $7.75 a square foot. Again, this is 301 Weston. Smaller units, and in my mind, a superior property. It's a newer property. So here's where we move up to the north of $6 a square foot when you have that type of quality property. The fourth comparison is 1145 Fife. It's an Inkster Park, but I think it's a fairly good comparison, although it is smaller. Half the size, built in 1967, so it's newer. The land-to-building ratio is 2.2 to 1. Similar ceiling height. It leases for $4.10 a square foot. The next comparison is back to the West End, 1350 Spruce, built in the late 70s, half the size, 17-foot wall height, 2 to 1 land-to-building ratio, otherwise fairly good, but again, the rent is $5.85 a square foot. Next we have St. James location, 1741 Wellington, 1963, about half the size, and it has very low rent, $3.80 a square foot. It has a low land-to-building ratio as well. And again, in that location on Dublin, 1577 Dublin, built in the 1970s, just under 9,000 square feet, 24-foot ceiling height, multi-tenanted property, leases for $4.75 a square foot. Number 8, we're back to the West End at 1574 Erin, 1956 build, just under 10,000 feet, signed just before the reference date for $7.13 a square foot with a 2 to 1 land-to-building ratio, but it has a high degree of finish. Actually, I think that's... Yeah, that's the property I mentioned in rebuttal that was completely refinished for the tenant, and the exterior was redone. So I had mentioned that in our mind, we would be south of that rent. And actually, sorry, that's a miscalculation. It's not 713, it's 688 a square foot. The next comparison in the West End is on Notre Dame, 1952 build, 1500 Notre Dame, 10,000 square feet, lease signed, multi-tenant property, paying $5.50 a square foot. Again, to Wall Street, 1090 Wall Street, built in 971 Wall Street. This is a newer property, built in 1999, single tenant, 20-foot wall height, 2 to 1 land-building ratio. Again, when we go north of $6, there's usually a reason. This is $7.50 paid, but it's almost a brand new, 1999 build property, much, much newer. I hope the board is understanding our rationale in how the rents are fitting together. The next is on White, 1425 White will be discussed later today. There's one tenant in that building with 10,000 square feet, and they're paying $4.81 a square foot with a higher ceiling or wall height and a higher degree of office finish. On Border Street, 1266 Border, multi-tenant property, 11,000 square feet. They pay $4.75 a square foot. This again is 1970s vintage. 1090 Wall Street, built in the 60s. Single tenant, close in size, very close in size to the subject property, a little bit greater land-to-building ratio, ceiling height similar. This is a great comparison. They're paying $4.79 a square foot. Jarvis Avenue, 440 Jarvis, part of a multi-tenant property, 17,000 feet. They're paying $4.50 a square foot. And lastly, back to Erin, 945, 1945 build, single tenant, just under 20,000 feet. Similar ceiling height, land-to-building ratio. They're paying $4.59 a square foot. The average of all of the comparisons is $5.41 a square foot. The median is $4.81. I think I have shown that there are some patterns when we look at all the site-specific, or the site-specific characteristics of the properties. And when we come back to the subject, low land-to-building ratio, low ceiling height, minimal finish, aged property, we think $7 a square foot is excessive, and we ask the board to consider even $6 a square foot, which is a little higher than I think our best comparisons. We have no contention with the city's vacancy allowance of 6%. That's based on market in the West End. Nor do we have a contention with the shortfall allowance of $3.75 a square foot. We have a contention with the non-recovered expenses. I have a separate document that was submitted with the evidence on the management, or what's called the management fee. And I think every panel member has heard this multiple times, so I'll keep this very brief. Up until this cycle, the city had always allowed an allowance of 7%, which included factors such as structural reserve and non-recovered expenses. This is all documented in that second document, but I'll just go through the main points very quickly here. Non-recovered expenses are all of the expenses that an owner will incur in order to generate their revenue that they cannot typically recover from their tenants. These include certain professional fees. They include leasing commissions, tenant inducements, a number of types of expenses that typical leases don't allow recovery for. In 2020 assessment cycle, for the first time ever, the city had veered in its approach of allowing 7% amortized per annum down to 2%. And we understand that the rationale is that all non-recovered expenses except for structural reserve were believed to be recovered as a management fee. And we submit in our study that that is not our experience. What we see in the market is that a management fee is a recovery, something completely different. If you don't recover a management fee for which you have an expense, you then have a semi-gross rent that should be adjusted. What we're talking about is anything past that, that's non-recovered typically by the owner. An owner-occupied property will have less of these type of expenses, we admit, but we're looking at the market value and how it would perform in the market. We're looking at capitalization rates, which have been derived, at least on our side, by applying the 7% total non-recovered expenses. In our opinion, it throws off the entire, or at least our side of the model, when we simply take out one of the expenses. There's been no indications in the market when we looked at broker studies that anything has changed as far as the recovery of management, non-recovery of management, or the allowance of non-recovered expenses. So to suddenly veer in our determination of net operating income while still utilizing capitalization rates that are derived with an allowance in our mind is inappropriate. The main evidence that the city will have, I'll just jump because this would probably come out in the questioning and then I would answer to the questions, but I'll just jump to this. The main reasoning I believe that the city has is twofold. One, that they've, in our opinion, changed the definition of what are non-recovered management expenses to be simply management. They say that's recovered and therefore you shouldn't allow it. That's wrong. The second is they believe that some of the items included in the non-recovered expense definition, leasing commissions and tenant inducements specifically, have been determined by the municipal board to be disallowed. If I may take a moment to talk about that interpretation of board decisions. It all stems from a decision in the 1990s for the Richardson Center. Any subsequent decision refers to two original decisions. They say the board has already determined this, go back to the Richardson Center and National Trust. The first decision, what the owner was asking is a lump sum deduction for all of the tenant inducements required to generate the rents in place. That's not what we're suggesting. At the time, you'll see in our submission, there was the allowance applied that at the time the city actually defined as being non-recovered expenses such as leasing commissions and tenant inducements. What happened in that case is that the appellant dropped their position on the deduction of tenant improvements. Remember, this is a very different thing. This is a lump sum deduction for tenant inducements, not an amortized amount which is already being included. I can understand why the owner's agent said, whoa, what we're asking you is actually a double deduction, you've already amortized it. That's our interpretation of what happened with Richardson Center. The board's comment was simply that they won't be deducting any further tenant inducements. The second one goes a little further. National Trust is 444 St. Mary, another office building. Another case where the owner's agent asked for a lump sum deduction for all of the work that the owner had to put into the property to come to what's called a net effective rents, which is south of the actual net rent. Again, in this case, in the city's evidence was the 7% allowance. In the city's evidence was likely their manual, which is in our submission, which defines the 5% portion of that non-recovered allowance as being for such items as non-recovered, not management fees, but non-recovered expenses. Defined by the Appraisal Institute as including tenant inducements and leasing commissions. Known to the market as including leasing commissions and tenant inducements. Deducted by other assessment jurisdictions, such as Saskatchewan and Ontario, including leasing commissions and tenant inducements. The board was faced with a question to make a lump sum deduction for all the costs put in to attain the rents. and make an amortized allowance. The board decided no, and we agreed, that's not appropriate. The board said we shall not be deducting tenant inducements and leasing commissions from the expense, from the income. Put in context with the question being asked for them, it is clear to us that they're saying we're not going to make an additional deduction to a net effective rent. Every decision since then, I think there's 5, leading up until the early 2000s, has asked the same thing of the board. Give us all of the tenant inducements as a lump sum deduction from the rents. No, we won't do that. We've made this decision before. We already have an allowance in place, and what you're asking is for a net effective rent, which would throw off all of the calculations in the model. We agree. What's happened since then, as of this cycle, is that the city is suggesting that the board has made what they call a jurisdictional exception to ignore the concept of leasing commissions and tenant inducements. That's not at all what the boards were saying. In the context of those decisions, they were saying in those cases they won't be making a lump sum deduction of these items. They didn't say anything about an amortization of the expenses, which they were still allowing. So in our mind, with all due respect, we think those board decisions are being taken out of context. Those are the 2 positions that the city has to suddenly drop the non-recovered expense allowance. We disagree. We think that the allowance should stay at 7% until such time that we see substantial evidence to suggest otherwise. Once we make that deduction, we come to an adjusted net operating income that we then capitalize at 7.7%, which we agree with based on our capitalization rate study, which was determined including the 7% non-recovered allowance for all of our incomes. And so we don't have a contention with 7.7%. That then brings us to a revised value on page 9, $756,000. That value per square foot, Mr. Chairman, is $65.20 a square foot. Now, this is a very contentious issue about the non-recovered expenses. In our mind, it's inflating values by 5%. That's what it's doing, and we think it's inappropriate. So the last step I did in these cases is, I'm asking you to base your determination of the value on the evidence I provided, which includes that allowance. If we were wrong about that, we should have a value which seems higher based on a sales comparison approach than what we're suggesting. We don't often do a direct comparison approach because it is frankly, it can be very difficult because of the amount of adjustments that are required. An income approach is a more precise method where you can adjust different rates and allowances to more appropriate what the market is believing. But in this case, I wanted to take one step further because I understand that there still is disagreement on this issue. So no matter how I get to the value, no matter how I get there, if I use the lower or higher rent or allowance or not allowance, the value that I'm proposing is $65.20 a square foot. Let me show you some sales in the market that I think justify this type of value, or this value, sorry. On page 10, we have an 18,000 square foot building on Church Avenue in Inkster Park, 2-to-1 land to building ratio, built in 1975, so it's newer, sold right at the reference date, February 2018, for $1,050,000. It's otherwise, I think, a quite good comparison. The sale price, Mr. Chairman, was $57.69 a square foot. Second comparison is on McPhillips, closer to the west end. 21,000 square foot, rigid steel building with about 10% office, 20-foot wall height, built in stages between the late 50s and the late 90s, over a 2-to-1 land to building ratio. Sold in early 2017 for $61.24. It's now used as an auto dealer and service garage. Page 11, 1395 White, much larger property, in this case 46,000 square feet, but built in stages between 68 and 2008. The effective date here is 2001. It's on a 2-to-1 land to building ratio, sold in August 16 for $76.38. This is a far newer and more far superior property. That's the type of property that command what the city is suggesting for the original assessment. And I think it's far superior. We would be south of that value by far. The next is in the West End, I think this is a fairly good comparison. Effective age of 1971, 18,000 feet, 2-to-1 land to building ratio. It's a great comparison in my mind. Sold for $30.40 a square foot. Page 12, 986 Wall Street, just up the street. Industrial warehouse with front office, about the same size. On a 1.6 acre fenced compound for ample car and trailer storage. It's over 3.6 to 1 land to building ratio. Purchased in February 2017 for $50.80 a square foot. When we get up to the higher values again, here's an example. 731 Wall is a higher finish. So, and this is one of the problems. When we go through the West End and look at these properties, they look the same on paper when you say they're 18,000 square feet and therefore they're comparable. There's a wide difference between these minimally finished industrial properties and one that is almost exactly the same location and size, but it's been completely finished as an office or commercial use. And here we have an example of that. In that case, the property sold for $78.60 a square foot, very different type of property. So, Mr. Chairman, no matter how we get to the value, whether or not the board agrees with some of the exact rates or allowances that we're proposing, the value that we're proposing of $65 a square foot, we think has been substantiated and corroborated by market comparisons shown from the direct sales comparison approach. And we think no matter how you get to that value, that this is a more appropriate value for a property such as the subject. And we ask the board to consider that value, and that's our presentation. Thank you.
Just a quick question on your page 13.
Yeah.
Those numbers aren't right, are they?
Probably not. No, I'm sorry. Totally wrong. Just ignore that page. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry for that. 756 is the value we see.
okay. Questions?
I was curious, so I guess those, the direct sales comparison approach value, again, you're just using those to kind of just more support value, I guess?
That's exactly it. We don't typically rely on the direct sales comparison for these type of properties. But what we do use it for sometimes is when we come to an income approach value that we think needs an extra substantiation. So we look to the sales as basically to corroborate our income approach value.
Okay. That's actually all the questions I have just on that. Thank you.
Mark, any questions?
Your argument about the municipal board cases is the first time that I've heard
Really?
an argument presented the way that you have.
Well, I apologize. I would have gone through more detail on the presentation. I'm sorry, Mr. Preston.
No, that's quite all right. I'm just saying that I haven't heard that before. Of course, I mean, we're bound to make decisions on the basis of the evidence that we hear at the time. There is a question, of course, always as to what extent does one apply general knowledge one has acquired, which might be opposed to specific evidence. I'm wondering what your view is on that point.
Not sure if I quite follow. I'm sorry.
Well, if you presented that information, and if one, as a board member, drew a conclusion about what ought to be done with this issue and applied as a general rule, what happens when you get, at your next hearing, a fairly eloquent description of the opposite argument from the other side? I'm wondering what your view is, having spent a lot of time before the board. To what extent is the panel bound to make use of the information exclusively that has been heard at this hearing versus a general conclusion they have come to on the basis of many hearings?
Yeah, our office is of the opinion that this panel is to make decisions based on the evidence before them.
Okay. Second question would be, you noted that there is a difference between whether a property is owner-occupied or leased with respect to whether there are non-recoverable expenses.
Yes.
What is your assumption? And we have to, think of the potential buyer on April 1st, 2018, who would have been purchasing this property, is that a buyer who will be an owner-occupier, or is that a buyer who will be leasing it out? Do you have a figure in your mind as to properties of this type? What percentage are owner-occupied in Winnipeg, and what percentage are actually leased out?
Of this type of, well, I'll answer that question first, the last question. I don't have an approximation, but from my experience, I mentioned at the beginning that I typically raise a flag when I see an older, single occupant property, such as this, that in my mind wouldn't necessarily be what's called an investment type property that would have been purchased for income potential. Oftentimes it is, but then we investigate. And step one is, do we see any evidence of listings or lease listings over the last even 10 years? And if we haven't, the flag's been raised higher. And then we go further and further. Unfortunately, it's quite a process, costly both in dollars and time. So we're having trouble doing it every time. But in some cases, we sample and we find this is what we thought, like 1556 Erin, and we'll see it again with the property on Clifton. What percentage, I wouldn't be able to say, but it's high enough that it raises a flag in our mind. Now, coming back to the first part of your question, how the market would behave in purchasing this property, I think the exercise that we're trying to do is a market-based approach. So whether or not I was purchasing this property to occupy it as Slaughter's Millworks, rather than Winwood Millworks, I would be purchasing it on my assumptions of how the market would behave from an income approach standpoint, which would include my interpretation of what the fair market rent would be should I decide to rent it. It would also include a deduction for certain allowances, such as vacancy, etc., and would have a capitalization rate, which either I would glean from broker studies with understanding that they also make deductions, or from my own investigations. And as I mentioned, our capitalization rate study includes these types of allowances. So I guess the point is that although I would be purchasing it for my own use, I would still be trying to mimic what the market would do if buying it for its income potential. That includes allowances such as the allowance that I'm asking the board to consider.
So you're essentially saying, bias it towards the assumption that this is going to be a leased property.
Exactly.
But we don't know how many of this type of property are actually leased out and how many are owner-occupied.
That's correct.
In which case it wouldn't apply.
Well, yeah, that's right. If I was looking at the actual expenses for this property, being an owner-occupied property, I would expect to see that the non-recovered proportion would be relatively low. It would still be something. But what we're trying to do is mimic the behavior of a purchaser by an income approach, looking at allowances that we believe over the life of the property would be incurred.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Yes, I'm just wondering, you indicated that the assessment that had been received was 40% over the last cycle.
Yes.
And I am wondering what the assessment was the last cycle, and whether, I'm assuming you're considering the original assessment, not the recommended assessment of 938. Can you say that?
That's correct. So on page 15 of our presentation, you'll find the assessment summary, and it shows what the previous assessment was for the 2018-19, which was based on a reference date 2 years previous. And you can see that it was $710,000, which would equate to a 44% increase. Now, let me be clear, I don't put much weight on this. I think we can have large increases, or zero increases. We can even have a decrease in value sometimes, just because it's, again, based on the evidence we're bringing forward. But this is yet another, what I'd like to call a flag raised. I see no reason why a property should be increased 44% in 2 years when nothing's changed with it.
May I ask, was there an appeal during the last assessment?
That's a good question. When I mentioned, I said agreed upon, and in the back of my mind I paused and I said, was this actually heard or was that the assessment set? And I don't have the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to, we're getting late in the cycle to be doing this, but I have actually read all the decisions on the non-recoverables. And I don't recall the board ever having ruled that tenant inducements and leasing commissions are already included in the 5%.
Well, the thing is, it's implied, I mean, it's already there is an allowance.
Well, my experience on the municipal board is if nobody questions management at 5%, the board's not gonna turn their mind as to what that represents.
Yeah, and see, I just think that taking one statement, such as we won't be deducting tenant improvements from the income, as a blanket statement, a jurisdictional exception, as an appraiser, that's a term that is typically used when the legislation is clear about an item. Don't value a railway on its value, value it on its, on a legislated rate, for example. Don't value on the highest and best use, value on the current use. But this, in my mind, is stretching it a bit to suggest it's a jurisdictional exception, taking one statement. Because the board, I don't think, would go into detail about the fact that, we've already included an allowance. I mean, there's a 5% allowance, which is defined in the city's manual at the time as being for non-recovered expenses. Defined by the Appraisal Institute as including leasing commissions and tenant inducements, and applied in other jurisdictions. I don't think they needed to go into that detail.
No, but they did have rather emphatic statements that tenant inducements and leasing commissions are not to be deducted from income,
Yeah.
which is different than rent.
Well,
Income is different than rent.
and we had this discussion before, so I think the disagreement is that I think that's a very wide statement to take for all instances. I mean, based on that comment, we would ignore it in any other examples of properties. In fact, the assessor has suggested, for example, if a comparison property was completely redone, like the one I showed on Aaron Street, where they redid the finish and they redid the office, we would ignore that. We would ignore it in the valuation of the subject property because we don't deduct or consider tenant inducements. Well, I think that doesn't make sense. It's actually completely against the Appraisal Institute's instruction that you can't ignore these factors. That's like buying a house and looking at the comparison that just had the kitchen redone and saying, wow, doesn't matter, I'm still going to pay the same price. And that's what's being asked by the city when we take the board statement with a wide definition. And I just don't think it fits. It doesn't fit with assessment behavior, market behavior, or appraisal theory. So what I'm proposing, it is a theory, it is, because we don't know what the board's truly thinking. But I think before we go raising every assessment in the city by 5%, we have to understand that there may be a plausible secondary understanding of what the board was saying.
Except the principle is, the meaning is to be taken from the express word of the decision.
Well, I mean, I could, yeah. I think it was taken out of context. That's my position.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Any submission by either party?
No, I think they'll let the recommendation apply.
Okay. Still an interesting discussion even after all these months. All right. 865 Wall Street.
Mr. Chair, could we just take a short break?
Short break, okay.
5 minutes?
All right. Yeah, we've made good time. We still got 3 properties to go, so 10-minute break till 1:15. Oops, sorry. Eight 865 Wall Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-2369. The roll number is 13011889800. The address is 865 Wall Street. The owner is 3760538 Manitoba Ltd. The 2020 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $571,000. The parcel use is an industrial warehouse. There is 1 building on the premise. The effective year built is 1963. The wall heights are 14 feet. The zoning is M1 manufacturing light. The land area is 14,460 square feet, with a leasable area of 6,945 square feet, and a land plan area of 2.09. Turning to page 2 of my brief, you'll see the request for inconsistent mailer information have been received from the property owner. There are no subject sales or recent sales on such property, and there were no subject leases found. If you look at page 3 of my brief, this is just a list of my rent comparables. Now my rent comparables, they range from ages of 1948 to 1966. The effective year built of the building is 1963. The areas range from 2,790 square feet to 6,550 square feet. The rents range from $6.29 a square foot to $7.67 a square foot. And the wall heights range from 13 feet to 18 feet. Just to give the board an idea of what our rent is, the model rent we apply for this property is $7.11. This is a blended rent. However, just to kind of give the board an idea of where our rent falls within the comparables. I do some comparables here in close to the subject property in Aaron, Clifton. Again, just there's a range of the rents. Again, some of them are older in age. Some, for example, like the one here, 74, 1956, so slightly older, 688, I believe this one was discussed in the previous hearing, or property. So again, this is just a range of my comparables to show that I believe the rent we applied is to support. Page 4 of my brief is just the income valuation workup. For this property, we have two leasable areas, one at 1,945 square feet and one at 5,000, which gives us a total leasable area of 6,945 square feet. We're using a blended rent of $7.11. This gives us an overall potential rent of $49,432. We're allowing 6% for vacancy, which gives an effective gross income of $46,466. We're allowing 2% for the recoverables, $3.75 a square foot for the shortfall, which gives us a net operating income of $42,974. For this property, we are applying a model cap rate of 7.7%, which gives us an estimated value of $571,000. We change to page 5 of my brief, it's just another breakdown of the income valuation summary. Page 6 of my brief is just again some information about the capitalization rates. Again, they, as I stated before, are variables such as age, size, location, or things are cap rates. Again, if you look under the City Winnipeg 23rd percentile, you'll see the 7.7 cap rate applied falls within the range of our properties. 60% of properties fall within this range. And again, if you look at the other published rates, you'll see that our cap rate is supported by that as well. Page 7 of my brief is just some information about the Municipal Assessment Act and Service. Page 8 of my brief, you'll just see some photos of the subject property. Above, you'll see just a front view of the property on Aaron Street, or Wall Street, I apologize. Further below, you'll see a picture of the subject property just further back, just to kind of show the whole building. Page 9 of my brief just shows the rear photo, I guess it would be kind of a rear photo of such property with 2 loading bay doors for a warehouse space. And page 9 at the bottom just shows another angle further down Wall Street of the subject property. Page 10 is just some aerial photos of the subject property from different angles, just to kind of get a relation of the property and to just give you an idea of how the property falls within the land it sits on. And this continues on page 11 too, just a couple other photos of different angles to show the whole property. Page 12 maybe is just the parcel boundary and the current assessed value. And page 13 is just the subject property map, just to show the properties in relation to Wall Street. Page 14 through 17 is just the income expense mailer that the owners provided, and just to show that they were compliant with our request for the income expense mailer information. And page 19 again is just some information about the fresh look we've taken, which I don't really go into. Below is just again further cap rate evidence to support our model cap rates, again not to be used as comparables for the subject property, actual cap rates that happen in the market. And again, page 20 is just information about our non-recoverable samplings. Again, I'm not going to go into that because the board is aware of our position on that at this point. And page 21 is just some information about how the board or the assessment department follows the IAWO standards. That is my presentation, and I ask the board to confirm the value of $571,000. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Sloan?
No questions.
Mark, questions?
Why are there 2 premises?
There is, from what I can pull from our records, I didn't virtually inspect this property, but there's like an office portion at the front of the building, and then there's like a warehouse portion at the back. So that's why it's broken into 2 areas. So the front, with the office portion being from our records, 1,945 square feet, whereas the warehouse portion is 5,000 square feet. for shop area, I guess we have.
What goes on in the building?
I believe this business is, what's this again? Again, I didn't inspect this property, so I don't have the exact information about what the business does in this petition. I know that, I know there's like an office portion and a warehouse, unless it's changed since those are records, so, I apologize, I'm not actually, again, as I didn't inspect the property, I'm not entirely 100% aware of what's going currently on this property.
But it's owner occupied?
Yeah, I believe it, I'm looking at my, this is the
It's the same.
same situation, yeah, it's the same.
Woodward, Woodward,
Yeah, Windmill Boardroom is the previous one, yeah, and it's the same as the, yeah, I apologize.
They have two buildings?
Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay. All right, that's all my questions.
Okay.
I note, yes, thank you. I note that you have indicated the potential rent as being $49,432,
That's correct, yes.
and on the income and expense mailer, it indicates the rent income is $65,791.
Yes. Again, this is like a similar situation, but this is like kind of an internal rent, so that's why we're not really putting much weight on this, we're just kind of like more comparable, so that's why I'm not putting really much weight on the other, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I want to ask about the rents too, but they're, you see an arm's length and they're set and they appear to be gross rents. I mean-
Yes, I believe City Group said they did, so.
Okay, no more questions then. So I guess we're getting a rebuttal again.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So this smaller document here is just providing a little more information about some of the city's rent comparisons. So the first one on Logan is, it's really a retail. It's occupied by Flame and Comfort, Fireplace Superstore, renovated building. It's, in our opinion, not quite the same sort of thing. We didn't have a chance to verify the arm's length nature, but we think it's a superior property in any event because of the finishing. The second is 1325 Clifton. You recall in the last presentation I had rebuttal around a property on Erin, and I mentioned that there's a property to the north that the owner also owned. And this is that property, so you'll see at the bottom, it's adjacent to, it's really one economic unit with the property that I talked about earlier on Erin. The business owner is Weir Holdings, and the occupant is Ground Star Systems, the same thing as the last, and I have the same documentation showing that that's the same person, as Bruce Weir. So in our mind, it's, regardless of how the rent, whether it supports us or not, I give less weight to that. The third comparison is, we talked about this one as well, it's actually in both the cities and our evidence, but in our mind superior because of the amount of renovations. That's at 1574 Erin. We talked about the fourth comparison, 1561 Erin. This is the one that there's no business assessment on now, but it was previously owned by our client, Koch Stainless Steel, client at the time. And the main difference here is it has a large compound, fenced, paved compound. The land-to-building ratio is 4:1. Again, that would be something to consider when we're looking at our subject property, and adjustment should be made. The next comparison, 650 Erin, is one of the ones on today's docket. It's Piston Ring. It's owner-occupied property with an internal rent. And the last comparison is on Dublin. It's only 2,700 square feet. It's occupied by Crazy's Car Clinic. They do car stereo installation. It's sharing a lot with an adjacent unit. Land-to-building ratio, it has ample parking access. Land-to-building ratio is 4:1. Again, something to take into consideration. So of the three comparisons that we think we can give weight to, we think there are enough factors about those comparisons which would warrant a rent less for the subject property. That's all we're about.
Any questions on the rebuttal?
I guess the question is like, in terms of like the land to building ratio, I understand some things are higher, but I believe, you know, cap rate we have put at 7.7. I feel that is the kind of a factor we have placed in to like show that, you know, we're being, the cap rate we have applied, I feel like is
That's
covering.
not really a question.
Okay, yeah, it's not a question, I guess, yeah, but okay, yeah, so.
But it's fair comment.
Mark, any questions on the rebuttal?
I have no questions, thank you.
So you go on to your main presentation.
Yes, thank you. So we have here the thicker version of the document. Page 1, we have a photograph of the property. It's actually very similar to the previous property. It's the same owner and occupant, Winwood Millworks. The differences here that I'm recognizing in our valuation are that it's a smaller building. It's just under 7,000 square feet. And because it's a smaller building, the similar sized lot has a greater land building ratio. So these two factors, and the bit of office as well. We go through the same analysis on page 7 for our market rent, but as opposed to the previous conclusion that we ended up at $6 a square foot, we found that this would be higher. Actually, if I could just ask you to turn to page 7 so you can see it's the same comparisons. I won't go through each one again because I went through that in quite detail, but the point being is that when we look at a larger swath of comparable or superior properties, we find that those ones that we had concern about from the city do in fact seem to stick out on the higher end in our opinion. We should be somewhere around the $6 a square foot. We've increased that in this case. We felt that the conclusion would be between $6.25 and $6.50 a square foot because of the smaller building size and subsequent greater land to building ratio. And so we chose $6.45 a square foot. That actually is the rent in place, but it's an internal rent. So it's simply coincidence that we end up basically at the same. An internal rent can be, it can be anywhere compared to market. It sometimes can be a little lower because it was an estimate at the time. Oftentimes we find it's higher because there's tax implications for the registered owner to have more expense applied to the business. So that's usually what happens. Sometimes it coincidentally ends up at market. So just because it's not arm's length doesn't mean it's not at market. It simply means that you should investigate further and don't use it as the primary indicator. So again, our evidence suggests between 625 and 50, and we've used 645. Market vacancy allowance, we have no contention. Market shortfall rate, we have no contention. We do ask the board to consider the higher non-recovered expenses of 7%. And the capitalization rate of 7.7, we have no contention. So on page 9, our revised value will be $488,000, which equates to $70.31 a square foot. And for the same reasons as the last property, because there are some contentious issues involved in the valuation, I wanted to be able to show that our value, regardless how we get there, is not contradicted by the market evidence from sales. And so we show the same sales, and again, I think based on those sales that we went through last time, $70 does not seem inappropriate for an income approach valuation. And that's about it, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll conclude our presentation with that.
Any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mark, questions? No questions. Gisela?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, I see no questions. Short and sweet. Okay, we go to 1425 White.
The file number, or thank you, Mr. Chairman. The file number is 19-3755. The roll number is 1309-249-0500. The address is 1425 White Avenue, and the owner is 259-4618 Manitoba Limited. The 2020 assessed value based on the reference date of April 1st, 2018 is $3,668,000. I do have a recommendation for this property. I'll just give a little explanation again tonight. If you want to follow again on page 4 of my brief, just so I can give you a little bit of background. This particular property, if you look at, you'll see we have a total leasable area of 96,538 square feet. I was actually able to inspect this property since we saw it last Thursday, because there were some issues with the leasable area that that it was reported in the mailer, and some area that we believe that there are some areas of the property have that are not usable space. So if you look at actually, just gonna kind of follow, if you look at my brief, you see 10 class, you'll see when it says 08 substandard basement at 12,472 square feet. Now that area is the basement area of this particular property, and after inspecting the property, determined that this area is not leasable space. It's very old, they built in 1906, so it's very old space, non-leasable. So we removed that from our valuation. So, and if you look further below, at the bottom, the one that says C2 standard office finish at 7,571 square feet. This was an upper portion or mezzanine space on the building as well, and I was able to inspect that area as well. And there was some upgrades they did to the building with ventilation and such, so that had to go all in the upper floor for the mezzanine spaces. So that floor spaces at this point would be unusable at this point. So that's why I'm removing that as well from our leasable area. So I revised the leasable area to 76,495 square feet. So that's the leasable area, the new leasable area we're using going forward, and we'll adjust going forward. I haven't shown in my workup, I just show the one rate, 433. As you see, obviously this building has many buildings on it, excluding those two areas. So there is a blended rent. I just haven't shown all in my recommendation. I haven't showed all the other areas, but the blended rent is $4.33 is what I'm recommending in this case. Just to give you a little idea of previously what it was before with the areas, it was actually at $4.28 a square foot previously, with all the other areas in it for the leasable area. So that being the case, I made no other changes to my my valuation, under the valuation, just to the rent and the leasable area. So the original assessment, $3,668,000 is original, and I'm recommending the $2,940,000, which is based on the revised leasable area and the rent.
How do you feel about that amount?
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollingwood. We will continue.
So,
Yeah, continue from
Yeah.
Okay, let's go a little bit into the property description. The parcel uses an industrial warehouse. There are 4 buildings on the property. The effective year built is 1953. The wall heights range from 11 feet to 28 feet. The zoning is M3 manufacturing heavy and M2 manufacturing general. The land area is 159,201 square feet, with a leasable area, revised leasable area is at 76,495 square feet, with a land to plan area of 2.22. If you look at page 2 of my brief, you'll just see the request for income information have been applied by the owner. The subject sale history, there are no recent sales. And below there's some subject leases for some of the areas in the property here. If you look at page 3 of my brief, is my rent comparables. Now again, we have used a model rent, or adjusted rent, sorry, at $4.33 a square foot. So if you look at comparables, they range from rents of $4.41 a square foot to $5.50 a square foot. The ages range from 1958 to 1980. The areas range from 37,880 square feet to 58,000 square feet to 58,000 square feet. And the wall heights range from 12 feet to 28 feet. So, so yeah, some of my rents are higher than ours. Some of the rents are superior in terms of age, wall heights. So there's just kind of a range of properties. So I'm just going to show you where our the adjusted rent I've used, it falls within my comparables. So. And they have similar, I didn't write it down, but they do have similar land to building ratios, and some of them are larger, but some of them are very close to the subject property. So, page 4 of my brief is just the income valuation workup. Again, I'm relying on my revised. Where did I put? So I'll just quickly go through it quickly here. So again, we're using a leasable area of 76,495 square feet at a rate of rent at $4.32. Which gives us a potential rent of $331,453. We are applying 6% for vacancy and $3.75 a square foot for shortfall, 2% for expenses, which gives us a net operating income of $288,123. and we are applying a 9.8% capitalization rate for this property. Again, we're basing that we're basing it on its age and things like such as its lower land plan area, so that's why we applied this capitalization rate, and which gives us my revised value of $2,940,000. Page 5 of my brief is just the original work of income value summary, so I'm not really putting much weight on this one because I have no revised. So with page 6 of my brief, the cap rates you'll see that the cap rate, our cap rates are based on variables such as age, size, and location. So if you look under the city of Winnipeg's low to high bracket under industrial, you'll see at 9.8 is really is on the high side. Again, the reason we have chosen that or to apply that cap rate is due to the fact of the building's age and its land plan area. So that's why we've used the 9.8% cap. Page 7 of my brief is just some information about the municipal assessment tax excerpts. Page 8 of my brief just shows some photos of the subject property. First page at the top just shows one portion of the front of the building, and below you'll see another portion of the building, another entrance into the building for another business. Page 9 of my brief, you just see an overview of the subject property. You'll see kind of where the property is in relation to on the land it sits on. So you're just kind of getting over it earlier. It's behind it some railroad tracks, just to give you an idea. Page 10, you just get a better kind of another overview of the subject property, the building's relation to the parcel it sits on, and just the parking lot here as well. And it's in relation to White Avenue. Page 11 just shows the back of the building. Just the back portion of the building to show where the buildings are situated and the different wall heights of the buildings, as you can see. Page 12, I just have shown, these are just some pictures of the actual floor plans we had at the time. Again, I just have shown these, this is before I adjusted these layers. I don't believe these are completely up to date, so I was just kind of at the time of showing them just to show kind of a floor plan of the building, so that we have in our records. So page 14 of my brief is just the parcel boundaries or the properties relation to the parcel of land it's on. And page 15 is just the subject property map where the building is in relation to on White Avenue. Page 16 through 25 is just the income expense information that the owners provide us with. And again, also on their mailer, that's where they had shown that the lease layer is at 76,000. So that's why, again, another reason to go to adjust the lease layer based on what they're reporting. So. Page 26 of my brief is just some information about the first look we've taken. Below 26 is our cap rate evidence to further support our model cap rates, the back of cap rates in the market we're finding. Page 28 is just some information about our non-trouble expense sampling. And not really going into that much, because I'm sure you're aware of that. And page 29 is just some information about the IOW standards and how this proper falls to them. So I ask the board to confirm the value I've presented, or recommendation I put forth, and thank you.
Questions?
Just a couple of things, Mr. Harling, so the owner has submitted the income and expense questionnaires, and they're detailing the actual income and the arm's length rent income, or rental revenue, I should say. But those aren't being given much weight by the city, rather you're looking to the market for what ends up being higher market rents and a far higher income. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Page 2 of your brief, you have the four tenants shown, and you are aware that one of these is double counting, correct? That Sir Seal is shown twice.
Yes, I do. Exactly. That's why I'm not really. I am aware of that. Yes.
Okay, so just to be clear for the panel, then the fourth comparison is actually incorrect. It's same tenant but with the wrong area.
Yes,
so
that is correct. Again, yes.
Okay, thank you. And you are aware that the property is on the impacted and contaminated sites list?
That I was not aware of. So.
It may be part of the reason for the high cap rate, maybe.
Okay. Again, I wasn't from my notes. I wasn't aware of that
Okay.
actually. So.
Yeah, that's all the questions. Thank you.
Mark, any questions?
So in your subject property leases, the Sir Seal, Unipoint, and Carter Day, does that comprise all of the area? Or is there an owner occupied portion?
I don't believe, let me add this up again. See, again, yeah, the area is a bit, it doesn't add up completely to the 76, I mean, it's,
No.
yeah, I don't believe there is any, I don't believe there's any owner occupied space in this building, so, yeah, these are the only subdivisions I have in place, I guess. Again, I'm unsure why the other area is not being shown here, so.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Any questions?
Yes, you say you inspected this
Yes.
property? And there are no occupants in the basement?
No, it's just an empty space. Again, it's an older, the basement portion building is from like 1906. It's very old. There would be really no desire for anything to lease that area, space out, so.
Thank you.
Okay, if I turn to your page 23, they show a net income of 114,000, but obviously there's a few things in mortgage interest and that 97,000 a year, meals and entertainment 40,000. So out of about 100,000 to that, you get about 214,000 in net income.
Roughly in that range, yeah, so yes.
Okay, and your model's getting 208,000.
Yes, I'm aware of that, yes, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You can proceed, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you. I do have some rebuttal evidence, Mr. Chair. Just get a glass of water. Okay, so for the rebuttal evidence, Mr. Chairman, the smaller document is handed out. Just a few comments about some of the city's lease comparisons. Number one, 405 Logan. This is our client's property. In fact, we had a hearing on this not too long ago. Almar Distributors is the occupant. It was, the lease is part of a lease, a sale leaseback transaction. And at the hearing for the property, I described that oftentimes can be a factor to consider, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the rent would be incorrect or not at market. It's still arm's length, but there could be motivating factors between the sale and the lease. And in fact, in my position, the rent is at market because it was they negotiated step-ups. And at the hearing for this property, I described that we tested it to market and ended up at market. So in this case, I agree that the rent is $485 a square foot. In fact, that's a stepped-up rent. But the problem that I have with the property is the description. The city has only shown, for the average wall height, the smallest portion of the property, the lowest ceiling height of a property that has multiple ceiling heights. And similarly, the effective year built is simply the original year of the oldest portion. So the description is skewed. The property is in fact, it is 45,820 square feet. It has a mezzanine space of about 1,700 square feet. It's office, but it was built in two stages, half and half basically. The 1960s portion, you can see in the picture, is on the right side, and that has the 14-foot wall height. But a whole other half of the building was built in 1999, and it has a 20-foot wall height. So in the city's own presentation on their assessment, they show that the effective year built is not 1969, but 1969 to 1999. The variant age is in the 80s. And the ceiling height as well is closer to 22 feet for half the property. So just a concern about the description itself. And that's $485 a square foot is the rent. A similar situation with Wilson. This was a property that we used to represent, and the city has again used the original age only of the first portion. The age is actually between 1972 and 88, and the ceiling height is between 18 to 24 feet. So again, it's a much newer property, and I think that has to be considered as when we're looking at comparison of the subject. The third comparison is what it is. They're paying $525 for a building that was built in 1980 with 28-foot ceiling height. It's in Olmans Creek. Land to building ratio was 3.79 to 1. The next comparison is on Bradford. Built 1960, 22-foot wall height. It's got a 2.28 to 1 land to building ratio, 18% office, and the rent paid is $441. It's a fairly good comparison for the newer parts of the property. 1551 Church. Far superior property in Inkster Park. There's a photograph on page 6. Land to building ratio is 3.37 to 1, which is quite large. It has ample parking at the rear. The property itself has cast-in-place concrete on slab, concrete block exterior walls, sprinklers, faucet lights, clear ceiling heights of, wall height, sorry, of 20 feet. Just a superior property. The next property is 99 Bannister. Again, I think a superior property. In this case, Mr. Chairman, the area cited is 58,000 feet. That's not including nearly 9,000 square feet of mezzanine space. It's not including that. And the rent paid for the superior property is $525. It has about 17% office finish, and again, a 30-foot wall height and a mezzanine that's not included in the area, and therefore the rent per square foot is actually higher than if we included the mezzanine. You can see that on the subsequent pages. After page 7, I have the assessor's workup, and it shows the mezzanine on that page. And the last comparison is 777 Century. This has a very large compound, fenced paved compound at the rear, so the land to building ratio is 3.61 to 1. Built 58, 22-foot wall height, 14% office, and it's at the corner of Century and Wellington, right in the St. James area. I think, again, far superior location and overall a superior property. That's all in the rebuttal.
Any questions on the rebuttal?
No question.
Mark?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, on the main presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's this larger document. Page 2 is a photograph of the property, and page 3 is an overhead. But if I could ask the board, I'll talk. This is the strangest property I've been in a while. And thank you, Mr. Harling, for coming and seeing it, because you really can't get a sense of how to value this until you really go through the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree.
I've got photographs, Mr. Chairman, starting on page 16. But to be honest, I like some of the cities are a little better to explain. So if I can ask you for a moment to please turn back to the city's evidence. I'm only doing this because the way that Mr. Harling's pictures are, it kind of helps walk through the description of the property. So before we get to the pictures, if you can go to page 10, their aerial photo, I'm just going to kind of give you a sense of how the property, how it all fits together first, and then I'll go into some specifics. So the property originally was built in 1906, and you can see in this aerial photo, it's quite nice because you can see these two, it's like an L shape at the front of the building. You see that L shape? That's the original property. It was built in 1906 and 1909. Okay? Everything else behind it is the warehouse that was built in the mid-60s. Everything that stretches all the way back to the railway tracks. The 1906 and 1909 portions are I thought, fascinating. Wood beam construction, wood beams that were old wood. I think they're 10 inches thick in the basement. It's just really, you don't see that often. But what we have in those buildings, and now I'll ask you to turn to page 8 because you can see it clearer in that picture of the city's evidence. So here we've got the two buildings. On the top is one of the two buildings, the one that kind of faces White. Now, just to put this in context as well, I don't know if you're aware of where White Avenue is. It's in the Weston area, right before the CPR tracks, so the rail yards. And there's a stretch of industrial along White Avenue on the north side. in what is actually a single-family residential neighborhood. Right, literally, from where you're standing taking that picture, basically your back is against the yards of the people that live along the backside of White Avenue. It's an odd street. It's not a typical industrial street. It's very small and older properties mainly down the stretch. So the front building, 1909 construction, it's been renovated quite nice. It's office on the main and second floor. The reason I wanted to be very specific about this is what you see on the second floor here is not the mezzanine that Mr. Harling was describing. That's actually part of the leasable area. It's occupied by an arm's length tenant who is a software programmers, yeah. So they have the second floor. And we'll get to them when we talk about the rents, but just so you remember, so you see it before we go into it, their name is Unipoint Software. So they have the second floor, accessed by 2 staircases, not elevator. The main floor are the offices for the largest tenant, which is Surseal. So they have the main floor office, and then they have almost the entire warehouse at the back. They're the primary tenant. 50,000 some odd square feet. The building at the bottom is the other part of the L shape, and that's the 1906 building. In here is the offices for Carter Day, who also has some warehouse space in the back. There is a small vacant office, and there's mostly just common areas, the rest of this building. There's a large lunchroom that is for any tenant. They share a lot of the space. And basically, as you walk through this building, what struck me is that the difference that Mr. Harling's leases add up to, which is just over 70,000 feet, and the leasable area that the owner is quoted at 76,000, is basically these common areas. The lunchroom, a small vacant office, and then the actual hallways to access the warehouse at the back. Because the way the building is configured is this building is the one that primarily leads to the warehouse at the back, which is actually a separate building, but they're now connected. And the owner has had quite a time trying to configure this property from what was a single occupant building. It used to be just Carter Day had the whole thing. But they downsized. The owner, our client, purchased it years and years ago, and he's had to make it multi-tenant, but because of fire codes and different codes, there has to be a lot of common area in place and wide hallways for access. So the difference between what's leased and the leasable area is basically common areas. And that was one of the questions of the panel earlier. I think page 13 is an interesting one now, of the city's brief, and then I'll go back to our presentation. You can see on this page how the spaces are basically divided. As Mr. Harling says, this might be a bit dated, but you see the L-shaped buildings at the front, on the bottom of the page. You see the large warehouse at the back, stretching back to what is the CPR tracks. And that warehouse space is divided into different areas, but is predominantly occupied by Carter Day as a small area, where they actually have tanks with cyanide in them. And the larger area is Surseal. They manufacture packing materials, and they occupy the entire warehouse to the back. What's interesting here, and I think an important part that I wanted to show the board, you see the area at the back that has a wall around it. It's the very rear part of the warehouse. It's about 11,000 square feet of the total 55,000 square foot warehouse. That essentially has been left as obsolete space, and it was vacant and nobody wanted it. The reason it was left vacant is because the main access to it, remember this was a single tenant building originally, was the spur track. Well, that has been closed off by CPR, and no matter how much the owner tries to ask them to have it working operational again, it's not in their plans. So the result is that the back part of the warehouse is completely useless to the owner. So there's no market to it. What he ended up doing is negotiating with Surseal and saying, look, I know you don't need more than 40,000 feet, but I've got the space. If you want it, I'd like to at least cover my costs. And they ended up negotiating a net rent of $1.50, basically so they can cover their costs and a little bit more. That's market. That's what actually happened. So I'll be describing the rents in a little bit, but I wanted you to see visually where these spaces are, because when I describe the rents, you may say, well, that one seems a little high. That's because of the amount of office. Or that one seems very low. Well, that's because it's this space here. So just to put that in context. So I think I generally have gone through the property description. It's not a good location. The owner has difficulty trying to attract tenants to this location. It comes with its problems. So with that, I will ask the board to turn please to page 8, where I go into our market analysis.
Can we just take a short?
Yes, certainly.
I'm sorry, I just have to extend my parking.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
No, she's just doing it. The joys of modern technology.
At least we don't have to run out to do it.
Yeah. Okay, I guess you can resume now.
Okay, thanks.
Parking ticket averted.
So on page 8, we start by showing what had been submitted by the owner to the city, which is the actual rents in place. And the assessor again had this on page 2. The actual rents are, the first is Carter Day. So now, keeping in mind I described this tenant as having office in the front and a warehouse in the back. They probably are about 30% office of the total. And so their rent that they're paying now is $4.81 a square foot, with a larger percentage of office. The second is Cercio Packaging. I have that in 2 parts. 40,900 square feet is the main area. It's the main warehouse with about 4,000 square feet of office, so about 10%. And they're paying $456 on that amount. Then they took the additional, it was $13,804 is that rear portion of the warehouse that otherwise sat vacant and nobody would use because its only access was the railway. So they ended up coming to a negotiation on that space at $1.50 a square foot. So their combined rent that the city showed on their page 2, when you take both areas together, that total 54,000 square feet, it blends to $3.40 a square foot. And then the last rent is on a modified gross basis. They pay $6 a square foot, from which there are some eroded costs. And that's all office. That's the Unipoint second floor office. So when you see these rents, it now makes a bit more sense. Why is that one paying $6 and this one's only paying $1.50? It all makes sense. It's all at market, and that's the best they can do. Now, it was an interesting conversation that we had about management, and one of the things that we're very adamant about is that non-recovered expenses that we believe are being contemplated by the allowance are not management fees. Management fees are typically recovered. And when you don't have recovery for a management fee, what you have is a semi-gross rent. This is a property that does not recover management fees. But I haven't taken that into account here. I'm still using the blended market rent, which is $3.76 a square foot, including common areas and everything else. So when leases are arm's length, and especially I know the amount of time and effort the owner has put in to try and market the space, that usually is the best indicator of market. Contract equals market when they're fairly current, arm's length, etc., etc. We still go through the exercise of testing that market rent, but it's difficult because the subject property is really like not much I've seen before, both location, age, and configuration. But we look at these comparisons, Mr. Chairman, and for the board's reference, I have photographs of each one of them, starting on page 19. And I won't spend too much time here, but basically, a lot of these are superior. The first one is in St. Boniface Industrial Park. It was built in the 70s, late 70s, 54,000 square feet, and the rent here for 21-foot wall height, and a 2-to-1 land to building ratio is $3.94 a square foot. So far, we say, okay, 376, does it make sense to that one on Beacon? Well, yes, it should be lower than that. Otter is in Fort Garry, built in 1965, 64,000 feet, and they were paying $3.45 a square foot. Sargent is in St. James. This is far superior property. This is used in aerospace manufacturing. Built in 1982 and 98, steel frame, 20-foot wall height, 70,000 square feet. Entire building is sprinkled, climate controlled, card access, security. It's a far superior property, and the lease that they're paying is $5.42 a square foot. So we definitely should be lower than that. The next comparison is an older aerospace manufacturing facility occupied by the same tenant, Standard Aero, 77,000 square feet, built in 1962, and they're paying $3.30 a square foot. So now we're coming to something that is still superior as far as location, but a little more akin as far as age, and certainly $3.76 does not sound out as being high in comparison. The fifth comparison is on Bury. 1964, it's 87,000 square feet, and they're paying $3.50 a square foot. Again, that I think supports the actual rents in place. Mountain is a superior property. It's actually a unit within a multi-tenant property, just about 100,000 feet. So this is what $5 a square foot typically will give you. 1977 warehouse, Inkster Park, with 29-foot wall height, far superior property. The next comparison is also a unit, is a single occupant building in Inkster Park, 1979 built, superior property, $4.50 a square foot, 31-foot wall height. Again, these are examples of what the city is applying to the subject property, of what you can actually attain with that, which is a much better property. Kernigan in Transcona is one unit of a large multi-tenant facility, $3.95 a square foot. That is basically on par with what we're saying for the subject. And lastly, Barrie is the old Eden's warehouse that's been divided into multi-tenant property, and they're paying $4.51 for an area that has a large compound. The long story short is that it comes back to our original position that unless there's reasons to believe otherwise, contract rent is probably your best indicator of market for a property. We therefore apply the actual rent of $3.76, supported by our market comparisons, as the market rent for the property. We apply the vacancy allowance of 6%, the non-recovered expenses of $3.75, and on page 10 we apply the non-recovered expenses of 7%. Now, Mr. Chairman, this is an interesting one because the city even has in their evidence, if I could ask you to go back to their brief, please, for a moment. And Mr. Chairman, you're already looking at the statement. This is their profit and loss statement, basically their income statement for the reference date, calendar year 2017. If you go to page 23 is the conclusion of the year-end financials. What you'll find at the top of that page 23 is a list of expenses which are eroding the income, which are real. They're non-recoverable. The only one that I would not include is the, and Mr. Chairman, you mentioned this, the interest on the long-term debt. But otherwise, we have professional fees of $15,377, actually, sorry, of $18,400 total. Advertising and promotion of $66.82. Office expenses of $81.41. Repair and maintenance that they can't, in this case, recover. I wouldn't include that as non-recovered for the purposes of our analysis because it's either going to be structural reserve or theoretically they should be recovering it. But in any event, you see here, there are real and significant costs that have to be incurred in order for the owner to attain the rents that we're basing the value on. This comes back to our position that these are real, especially with a facility like this. They can't be ignored. Shouldn't be ignored. The outcome of the entire analysis, or the entire income story, is that the net income is $113,791. We would add back the mortgage interest of $97,000, which puts the actual income for the property at around $210,000, $220,000. Far less than what the city is saying hypothetically the property could obtain, which is $360,000. This is real. If he could do any better, he would. In fact, I've inspected the property twice in the last few weeks, and I can say that the owner is doing a phenomenal job with this type of property. But that's real. The only other thing that we would add, that the city hasn't added, is that the owner has parking alongside the building that is in excess of what they need for their tenancies. And they actually have been able to rent some of those stalls out to a neighboring property. And the total amount that they rent them for is $55 a month. And when we apply an expense ratio that's typically applied of 45%, we come down to 65.34 additional income that the city hasn't added, but we are adding, because this is recognizing parking in excess of their needs. On page 11, the last difference that we have with the city, going the opposite way than we typically do. Not only have we added income for parking, I think, and this is very subjective, but 9.8 is a very favorable capitalization rate. Now, I know that the city is recognizing very important factors that an investor would look at in the risk of the property. The age, probably the location, possibly the fact that it's on the impacted, contaminated list site. It's contaminated, has been for years and years. So certainly a higher capitalization rate is warranted, but I did note that the last cycle, we agreed to the capitalization rate of 9.5%. Our position is that for many properties between the reference dates, capitalization rates have basically stabilized. I saw no reason to come forward today and say that we'll just grab the 9.8%, which is higher than that, and run with it. I think a more appropriate thing to do is say that we feel 9.5% is reflective of all the characteristics of this property. But we don't feel that 9.8 is necessary. So we have a lower capitalization rate of 9.5%. In summary, on page 11, actual rents of $3.76 a square foot, supported by market. Vacancy allowance, 6%. Shortfall. Non-recovered expenses totaling 7%. Adding back parking income, it brings us to a net operating income of $241,000. You will recall that the actual income in place is around $210,000. We capitalize that at our 9.5%, and that brings us to a value of $2,536,000, which is $33.13 a square foot. Again, I don't usually take this extra step because it's simply to support what we feel is the primary approach of valuation, which is the income. But there are some contentious issues in our valuation, and again, I emphasize, I don't care how you get to the number, but I ask you to consider our revised value of $33 a square foot. So to support that, on page 12, I have some, what I think are fairly decent comparisons, but although none of them compare to the location of the subject property. But we have one on Arlington, 1060 Arlington, arguably not the best location. Very similar property, it's aged, it's kind of built in portions between 1937 and 1999. It's 45,000 square feet. It's got ample parking, 2.5 million land building ratio, fenced compound. It sold for $39.55 a square foot. I think our 33 it makes sense when we look at them side by side. The next one is a very interesting sale. It's 450 Deschambault. It's a steel manufacturing plant located in St. Boniface. 55,000 square feet, built in stages between 58 and 95. It has a good office area of 4,600 square feet, a wall height of 29 feet, land to building ratio of 2:1. So it's actually a great comparison, except maybe not the location of White Avenue. But it sold in late 2015 for $36.30 a square foot. Right across the street, another steel manufacturing plant in St. Boniface for 50 Days Hotel. Is larger, 154,000 square feet, built between 25 and 97. It was purchased for $31.19 a square foot. And lastly, we talked about this one earlier today, 1369 and 1387 Richard. It's much smaller, it's only 18,000 square feet, sold for $30.40 a square foot. So again, direct sales comparison is very subjective because there's so many factors. But what we're using it for here is to say, does our value, based basically on something higher than actual income and capitalized at a responsible and appropriate rate, does that value make sense? And I respectfully submit that based on our sales, it does. So we asked the board to consider a revised value of $2,536,000 rounded. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, just for the board's reference, I do have additional photographs in the appendix, but I don't think there's anything I have to go into detail with here, because we've kind of gone through them. Photographs of the lease comparisons, and then the financial documents that the city also has in their evidence. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
One question. The back portion of the building, I know that where they have the rent, like $1.50, whatever it is, roughly. I just sort of forget, when you say for access, like they can't access it through because I'm looking at just like I think it's page 24 of your brief, which is, it shows like the floor plan of the building. So like, what do you mean by they can't access it, like from the outside? Like, because I just know I remember when I was there, like you see that one picture with all those bundles on page 17 at the back.
Yep.
So they can't access, like that door can't open, I guess, or or we can't get access through there, I guess, or?
No, they could access trucks there. I think mainly what they were talking about is the access. You would need to access it from the interior through Cerseal's space.
Oh, okay.
So they would have to demise more common areas in order, and of course Cerseal would have to be in agreement with that, and it would be quite a hassle. But for
Okay.
loading, I guess the reason I was saying that about the rail access is that if the rail access was available, Cerseal would probably take it.
Oh, okay.
Or another tenant would come along and say, this is pretty good space. But because you can't access it from the interior, and what you're left with is a rail access that's closed off, it becomes really not great space. And it sat actually vacant for about 5 years before he finally came to a deal with Cerseal.
Okay. That's all actually the question I had, thank you.
Okay, Mark, any questions?
But that back vacant space has truck loading access, does it not?
Yes.
On the basis of these photos?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no interior access to it, there's no railway access to it, but there is the truck loading access to it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. That's all my questions.
I'm just wondering about the common areas. Is any kind of a payment for the common areas reflected in the rent?
Exactly. So the rents that the tenants pay is inclusive of the use of some of the common areas like the lunchroom, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, and I'm looking at the profit and loss statement here on page 22 of the city's presentation.
Yes.
And I see that there are a couple of other groups called Sundance and Macau
Yeah, I
under
don't-
the rental income.
I think they were there in 2017, but they weren't there today, so I think they had very small spaces, perhaps carved out of some of the other office, or it may have been that vacant office that I mentioned that's about 1,000 square feet.
Okay. Then I'm also wondering, you indicated that this is a contaminated site.
Oh, sorry. The rental income from Macau, that's the parking. Macau is actually the tenant or the occupant next door. So I mentioned that they get about $11,000 for the excess stalls, and then we net that down after the expenses. That's what that is, 10904. Sorry about that.
And then what is this Sundance parking then?
Yeah, that might be another couple stalls, because as I say, there was no other tenants in the building, so any other income, either it's from somebody who's left, but I didn't have that understanding. So now this makes more sense, it's probably parking.
Okay. You indicated this was a contaminated site.
Yes.
Pardon my ignorance, but how are these sites designated as contaminated by the city? Like, is there some kind of a certificate or inspection?
It's a list, contaminated, impacted
Okay.
properties list. And I would have put this in evidence, but I wanted to clear it with the owner that he wanted us even mentioning it. He said, no, it's fine, but I already submitted evidence.
Okay.
So White Avenue is definitely listed on contaminated, and it makes sense. As I mentioned, Carter Day manufactures a product that uses cyanide, so they have large tanks there, and it's contained now well, but I mean, you go back to the early parts of the last century, and it was different standards, and the site's impacted by that. How that impacts the value is that if it's contained, everything's fine. It's not like going there is dangerous or anything. But certainly it has an impact on your ability to mortgage the property. And long story short is it has an impact on what an investor would expect for a rate of return. In other words, you would recognize this in your capitalization rate.
And how long has this owner owned this property?
It's about 12 years. I'm not sure if he has the...
So they have made improvements to the property since they've been there?
Yeah, it was a single-tenant property when he bought it. Carter Day occupied the entire thing, and then they downsized, so they put it on the market. And he came along and he bought it, and he thought, I think he paid around 1.8 or 2 million or something. And he has since then decided he will convert it to multi-tenant, so he's put in quite a bit of money to convert it. So he's made the offices nicer for the Unipoint and a lot of common areas so that you can get these multi-tenants through to the warehouse and meet code at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, on the, is it actually on the contaminated sites list or is it on the impacted sites?
It's on the, that's a good question. This is the Contaminated Impact Sites Program.
So that means it definitely, it hasn't definitely been found to be contaminated, but it's one that you'd have to do testing on before you could allow any sale or anything like that.
Yeah,
Or development.
I'm not sure how it will be defined, because unfortunately this list has both.
Well, basically, any gas station is going to be on the impacted sites list because you have to worry about gas leakage
Yep.
from your tanks and that sort of. That
Exactly.
doesn't mean it is, it has leaked, that's mean the potential is.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I don't know the extent, when I asked the owner, I said, the property's contaminated, is that something that you would mind if I mentioned? He said, well, no, it's known. Okay. I think either way though, Mr. Chairman, the point is that it's at the very least a stigma that would be reflected in the rate of return expected by the investor.
Okay, now, touched on this, but the larger common area, that's not, you're not accounting for that in your vacancy rate? You're not considering it vacant, you're considering it part of the,
Yeah, I had difficulty trying to figure out which way to go with that. If I try and divide some of the area up into the leases being paid and change the per square foot rate, and in the end I just thought, it's not actually attaining income, but he cites it as leasable area, I'm just going to leave it. So it's a really a 6 of one, half dozen the other. I mean, the income is what it is, we can divide it by whichever area we want. There's no additional income being
you're
given.
basically going on gross. This is the income it generates and.
Yeah, exactly.
Alright, now you say they don't recover any management fee from that one lease? Which one was it, that you said?
No, it's any of the leases. They, you'll see payroll expenses, office supplies, any management-related expenses are found under non-recovered. Well, no, that's not true, actually. He has some administration here for $4,000. So it's a bit of a mix. In any event, I didn't make any deductions from the net rents, but what I'm suggesting is that there are real non-recovered expenses here that, in my mind, have to be recognized.
All right, those are my questions, so thank you for that. We come to our last property, 58 Weston. And I understand there is a request for non-cooperation on that, so can you read the information and then the request for non-co?
The file number is 19-3805. The roll number is 13062310000. The address is 58 Weston Street. The owner is Briette Weston Street Holdings Limited. And the 2020 assessed value based on the working statement of April 1st, 2018 is $3,177,000. Again, yes, we are requesting non-compliance for this property. Would you like me to go through the...
Yeah.
If we look at page 14 of my brief, where it starts, you'll see this is the letter we had sent out. And then if you continue on page 15 through 17, it's the blank mailer that we had sent out. And if you look at page 18 of my brief, you'll see the proof of mail delivery and the signature as well as the tracking number to say that the owner did receive the request for the mailer, which we had not received. I would like to note though, however, we did eventually receive it, however it was over a year late, so we do have it now, but at the time when we did request it, it wasn't received till roughly, from my records, check here again. I believe it was April believe it was April of 2019 is when we received it. Yes.
Okay, any questions on
Just to reiterate, so that you did receive the questionnaire.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
That's all the questions.
any questions of the assessor? Okay, are you contending the non-co-op, or?
I'll just simply say that it was received. We admit it was late. We leave it in the board's hands.
Okay, I guess we're gonna have to take a minute to consider this.
Do you want us to leave?
Yeah. Okay, we're going to grant the non-co-op, although it was received and timeframes are important and this wasn't even. So you can proceed with your evidence.
Mr. Harley, did you want to go ahead with?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
do you have an agreement?
I do have a recommendation actually on this property. Yes. So I'll give you
Okay,
this,
well then, we'll take the expedient.
So if you want to turn to page 4, maybe just if you want to follow along with my initial work up with the recommendation. So what I've changed, or what am I recommending here is the rent. You were using a model rent of $6.70 a square foot at 41,157 square feet, which gave us the estimated value of $3,177,000. I haven't changed any other parameters. However, I adjusted the rent to $5.40 a square foot, which is the rent that was in Mr. Slaughter's evidence. I felt that was a better market, better reflected the market for this property, as well as just to kind of show scaling back. If you look at page 2 of my brief, there was a sale of this property in January 5th, 2016 at $2.45 million. Reviewing the sale, it wasn't a modified arm's length sale, so I felt we were a little high on. I don't believe the property's increased that much within that time frame, so we are using. I'm recommending a revised value of $2,606,000.
Taking your agreement with that value?
Yeah, and again, with the value, not necessarily the rates or the amounts.
Yeah, just the And again, we're asking just obviously for non-co-op.
All right, any questions of?
None.
From the panel?
Nope.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.